Welcome to our monthly workshop series at the University of Kentucky in our Work-Life Benefits office. Today, we will be talking about caring for the self at work, trauma-informed tools for resilience. And we have two of our therapists with us today, Eric Wilkinson and Rhonda Henry, and they are going to lead us in this discussion. Thank you so much for being with us today.
All right. Well, thank you, Azetta, and thank you everyone who is here today I appreciate the invitation. Ron and I were both this is a new presentation we put together just for this group, so we're excited to share this material today. Rhonda, we'll go. The title is Caring for the Self at Work, Trauma Informed Tools for Resilience. And we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. So today we're going to focus on exploring the mind-body connection in emotions. Emotions are often thought of in terms of words and language, but at their core, um, physical sensations, bodily sensations are at the root of all emotion. We're going to kind of define what trauma is and how it impacts us. The bulk of this presentation, we really wanted to give you all some tools and practices that you can take with you going forward, as well as resources to refer back to in the slides. So we really wanted to focus on introducing or sharing some trauma self-regulation practices, and then thinking about how we can structure self-care throughout the day with these trauma self-regulation practices. The presentation draws a lot from the work of some renowned trauma researchers and therapists, Pat Ogden, Bessel Kolk, and Dan Siegel, as well as other therapists and researchers. Okay, our next slide. So let's just kind of get really to the basics. If we think about how we make sense of our world, our brain creates internal maps of ourselves in the world. We can think of these as relationship maps during our childhood development. And these maps are extended and modified as we go through the course of our life with new learning. Um, some of the most basic relationship maps that we form at a young age include is the world safe or unsafe? Do I have value as a person? Am I worthy? Am I a good person? Am I worthy of love? These types of what does love look like? These maps of relationships are constructed at the same time that we're constructing maps just of our bodies, the bodies of others, how we learn to walk and navigate. All this is takes place in childhood through our direct experience. Once we start to build these maps, the brain is always helping us move through the world, comparing our internal maps with our sensory experiences, what we're hearing and seeing and touching in the external world. And so at its core, the brain is really about helping us move through the world with a focus on trying to keep us safe and maximize our health, as well as the safety and health of other human beings. Emotions are composed of physical sensations in the body and urges for physical action that arise in response to environmental stimuli. So again, at the root of all emotion is physical sensation. Emotions are always felt and arise in the body, which will be a lot of the focus in today's presentation. The amygdala is the emotional center of the brain. The amygdala is responsible, among other things, for tagging incoming stimuli from the environment, determining its emotional significance. And what I mean by this is whether we should, based on what we're interacting with in our environment, whether we should approach it, avoid it, or whether we can just ignore it. Um, the interpretation that's done by the amygdala is based largely on prior experience with our environments. And I think this is a really important point because a lot of times, we're both, Rhonda and I are both therapists. People that will come into therapy with us are often really hard and self-critical, hard on themselves and self-critical about emotional reactions. The reality is that emotional reactions to stimuli in the environment are largely outside of our conscious control. Our initial emotional reactions are largely determined by our disposition, our personality, and our prior experience. Okay, next slide. Oh, by the way, I meant to mention earlier, at any point during this presentation, if you have any questions for Rhonda or I, you can always put them in the chat, and I think there should be time at the end that we can address them. If we think about, I alluded to this earlier, the purpose of emotion is really to bring about physical movement to help us get out of harm's way. And that's the purpose of negative emotions, to tell us, hey, we need to avoid some potential harm or to move in the direction of something that feels nurturing, positive, source of pleasure and joy. Negative emotions, they can help us prepare to defend ourselves, to warn us that we need to protect ourselves, defend ourselves, prepare us to fight, or to turn our back on people who threaten us with harm. Um, Positive emotions really encourage us to approach people who are sources of safe intimacy and care. Dan Siegel argues that we, and not just Dan Siegel, but neurobiologists argue that we have a developmental drive toward integrating the right and left hemispheres of our brain. That is, integrating our nonverbal parts of our brain, our nonverbal emotions, the right located primarily in the right hemisphere, with our left hemisphere focused around language and thought. Um, Well-being is achieved the more that we can integrate our right and left hemispheres. Each of our emotional states um, automatically generates some sequence of actions that we know we can take. It's almost like through our direct experience with the world, we develop these maps of the world, and in these maps are maps or instructions for action. So there's, for a lot of our emotional states, there's almost an automatic or immediate um, uh, course of actions that we're likely to take. That's why when people talk about that we're creatures of habit, that's what it's about. So much of our action happens really on a unconscious or semi-conscious level based on kind of prior experience. But we are unique from other animals in that we have cognitive flexibility. We have the ability to make choices, to try different things, to respond to stimuli in our environment in new and novel ways. And we learn from the choices that we make. So we can continue to modify our actions based on our experiences, based on our use of logic and reasoning, our abilities to observe others, our abilities to experiment with new ways of being. Okay, our next slide. There's a particular part I mentioned earlier that our initial emotional reactions are largely out of our control. Um, that's when we encounter some stimuli, usually physical sensation arises within us in response to the stimuli. But we do know that there's this important part of our brain, the medial frontal cortex. It's involved with naming emotions, of organizing our emotional states, making sense, processing our emotional states. It's linked to our capacity to make choices and decisions. And it's also at the center of our ability to regulate our emotions so that we don't feel either overwhelmed or incapacitated by them. The medial frontal cortex, it regulates our emotions by helping us connect different areas of our brain particularly connecting our frontal cortex with our amygdala. This connection allows us to kind of organize how we want to respond to environmental stimuli. Also, and the primary way we do this is by bringing our initial reactions, which again are primarily physical sensations and urges, impulses, bringing them into language, giving them words, bringing them into our conscious awareness. This is also the medial frontal cortex is also where we store our memory of emotions. It's where we um, hold language for emotion so that we are able to label, process, make sense of what we are experiencing so that we can respond to it. We know through the research that, and this is important for all human beings, but particularly important for folks if you have trauma history. The capacity to name our emotions when they arise can help reduce our stress reactions. It can facilitate self awareness and self regulation. It allows us to take different perspectives on what we are experiencing so that we can notice the nuances of our emotions, the nuances of our experiences, and also to remind ourselves of the transitory nature of emotions. Um, Emotions come and go constantly. And really, most of the time, it's very rare that we're experiencing only one emotion. If we think about at the core of emotion is physical sensation, we know that as we move through the day, at all times, we're experiencing different physical sensations. We're experiencing different loud and subtle emotions. And so emotions coexist, they hang together, and and the medial frontal cortex is really um, how we're able to engage in with our emotions in a meaningful way. If we look over here on the right, this is a graphic I would encourage you to come back to, but on your own time, it just really illustrates um, different levels of specificity around emotional states that we commonly experience as human beings. Okay, our next slide. Um, so that's the kind of a general overview of what emotions are and how our brain works. But we do know that when we experience, even as adults, certainly when we're young children, there's not a lot of impulse control. There's not a lot of self-awareness of emotion. Very young children are just kind of, carried away with their emotions. But, as we go through development, we learn how to regulate our emotions. That being said, when we experience very intense emotions, this even for adults, when we experience really very intense emotions, there's a strong tendency to engage in automatic behaviors. And so, for example, if we feel really intense anger, this often leads to automatic confrontation with others, lack of impulse control or inhibition. We might say or do things that we wouldn't do under other circumstances when we feel very intense anger. If we're feeling very intense fear, this might automatically lead to us either to feel a sense of paralysis, like we just feel frozen, or it might kick in our flight response and we might flee the situation automatically. If we're feeling really intense feelings of helplessness, this can lead to us just kind of collapsing, just kind of giving up and collapsing. When we experience very intense joy or affinity for other humans, this can lead us to automatically want to embrace them or to run to them, to be with them and be around them. And so we know, like, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant emotions, really intense emotions, even if under normal circumstances we have a lot of poise and emotional regulation, intense emotions often lead to these automatic behaviors. Okay, our next slide. So let's talk about what trauma is. Over here on the right, we have a graphic that kind of looks at what constitutes trauma-informed care, and that can also be something, it's kind of developed within the healthcare field, but it's something that as individuals we can think about how do we care for our own trauma. This definition is kind of a summary of different types of research. It's not the DSM definition, but I think it's a meaningful definition. Trauma is reacting to a threat of death, serious injury, or sexual violence, or exposure to a threat of death, serious injury, or sexual violence to another human with overwhelming fear, horror, and helplessness from not being able to stop it or escape. It's often accompanied by feeling abandoned or uncared for from others during or after the event. And it can destroy our sense of safety in the world. We can get stuck in the trauma. The experience of the trauma can, if it's a traumatic experience, so that it's not so much the experience, it's how we are reacting and responding to something that makes it traumatic. But when it does elicit these feelings of helplessness, horror, um, intense fear, where we feel like there is no viable action we can take to protect ourselves, or if we're witnessing something horrible happen to another person, there's nothing we can do to stop it for this other person. When we go through that kind of experience, we can get stuck in the trauma where even when the event is over, we continue to feel like the world is not safe, we are not safe. Bessel van der Kolk asserts that there's almost like we have this persistent conscious or often unconscious inner voice or feeling that's saying to us at all times, you are not safe, you are in danger. I've linked here on this slide a nice video presentation where van der Kolk provides some good examples of the differences between everyday stress and pain and trauma. So I would encourage folks to check that out. Emotions after a traumatic event, emotions may no longer serve as an effective guide for action, particularly when we encounter things in our environment that remind us of the past trauma. So, for example, within a work setting, if we have a history of trauma, we might freeze when we encounter something that's really frustrating, or we might experience a sense of helplessness when there are challenges put in front of us. Um, there can be it can be just our interpersonal dynamics that can remind us of past trauma. There can be sights or smells that remind us of past trauma. There can be words that are used. There can be restriction on our autonomy or our choices. There's a lot of different ways that the amygdala, the emotional center of our brain, can um, flag something that's happening in our work environment as something that is threatening to our very lives or the lives of others. And so knowing what our trauma triggers are is very important, but also then learning how to respond to the sensations arising within our body. It's going to be a lot of the focus of our slides today. Trauma can impair our ability or our willingness to listen to our body. A lot of times, um, thinking about what we're experiencing physically, if you've gone through trauma, and particularly when you remember trauma, the types of thoughts associated with the trauma, people who often find these to be horrific and intolerable. And so, one of the ways people tend to cope is to stop listening to their bodies, to stop trying to block out their thoughts and their physical sensations. But in order to heal and effectively cope with trauma, we do have to turn our attention inward to our bodies. We have to have the ability to identify feelings and emotions, which is often impaired when we've gone through traumatic experiences. Other ways trauma can impact us, it can make it so we have less impulse control. We might feel overwhelmed by emotion. We might engage in behavioral responses that create conflicts with others, or are ineffective in helping us get our needs met. We also know that during a traumatic experience, but then often if we get stuck in trauma, it can be more difficult to plan for the future. There's a tendency to just try to survive day to day. If we think about what are the foundations of trauma-informed self-care, which is really our focus today, it's self-awareness, learning to be able to engage in self-awareness and self-regulation. And this happens by turning inward to our physical sensations, our impulses, our urges, and our thoughts. Okay, with that, I'm going to pass it over to Rhonda, and we're going to transition. So, Rhonda. Oh, I'm sorry. I got one more note here. Sorry, one more slide. The reason why I put this slide in here is that so the parasympathetic nervous system is when we are in our rest and digest state. It's associated with lower heart rate, a time when we're able to digest food. It's the opposite of our fight or flight response, which is the sympathetic nervous system. So it can create a sense of calm and safety in the body. Every time we do an out breath, we're activating our parasympathetic nervous system, which is why so many of the breathing practices emphasize doing long out breaths. The vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in our body. It runs from our brainstem through our chest and abdomen, branching out to our organs, all the way down to our colon. 75% of our parasympathetic fibers to organs are in the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve plays a crucial role in regulating our heart rate, our breathing, our digestion, our immune response, inflammation in the body. And we know that when we have more vagal tone activity, that this leads to reduced heart rate, lower blood pressure, better digestion, reduced stress, and more emotional regulation. The reason why I put these two, I wanted everyone here who may, probably a lot of you are familiar with the parasympathetic nervous system and the vagus nerve, but I wanted to provide some basic information because so much of the work in caring for ourselves when we have trauma responses is focused on activating the parasympathetic nervous system, activating the vagus nerve. Okay, and now I really will pass it over to Rhonda.
Take two. I'll try. I will take it this time. Thanks, Eric. So, how do we turn these things that we know and understand and this important research has sort of taught us over the years? How do we turn that into actions we can take to feel different, right? When we're in that moment, when we're tuning in. So that's what we're going to break down kind of in this next chunk. And again, all of this is sort of built on those concepts Eric was just talking about. And I think for both of us, we find it's often helpful for ourselves and people we're working with to understand the why. How do these pieces connect together? Why are we doing these things? Because sometimes they can feel small, right? We're just taking deep breaths or we're just putting our feet on the ground. And it can seem like a small thing that it's really easy to sort of, brush aside or not think it's going to have an impact. But I think it's that connection and understanding of what's going on internally and why we're doing these different activities. So let's break these down a little bit. As Eric just mentioned, two of the core pieces we're going to talk about in this part are around self-awareness and self-regulation, right? Those are the two core things we're trying to sort of get some practice around. And so one of the places that I think we start with that is this idea of just a basic body scan. Some of you all may have done this, whether that's been through therapy or other kind of self-work you've done, you kind of may be aware of this. For some folks, you may never have done this, or you may have heard about it, never kind of taken time to practice it or bring it in. But it really is a really nice kind of basic way to, give me 1 second here. Sorry about that. I was having a video thing. Give me 1 second. There we go. It's a really nice kind of basic way to get in touch with our body, to do that awareness piece. So we're going to pause at some point, and this is something we can do at any time. I'm going to break these down in a couple of different places throughout the day that some of these exercises might be more beneficial, but that body scan is a really good thing to get ourselves habituated to, right? We're just checking in with ourselves. We're going to pause, slow down a moment, take a couple of those deep breaths. We're going to be then scanning our bodies for things like tightness or heaviness, numbness, fluttering sensations, tension, different waves and sensations that come up in the body. And remember what Eric was saying, trauma may have historically taught us we don't want to tune into those things, right? But trying to bring care back online, trying to care for ourselves in these moments of overwhelm, we really want to be able to make that connection. So even then being able to name that feeling that we're having, I'm having tingling feet, having a nervous stomach or a jumpy stomach. And then asking ourselves that reflection, what might this be trying to tell me? What do I need right now? And that doesn't mean we always have an easy answer that's delivered to us, right? That's why we call this stuff practice, you all. I mean, you're going to get tired of hearing me say that, but it's the truth. The more we do this, the more we tune into ourselves, we start to understand our baseline, right? We start to understand, okay, on an average day, this is kind of what shows up in my body. When I'm starting to feel worried, when I'm starting to feel scared, what else do I notice coming up? So connecting those dots. And then responding with gentleness, with self-compassion, doing a deep inhale or exhale, doing a big stretch or walking around some, doing some movement, noticing without judgment, and even being able to bring in that kind of notice or that thought at the end there. I notice, I listen, and I respond with care. Because that's what we're trying to do in this kind of exercise, right? We're just tuning in. We're giving maybe some words or names to some of the things that we're feeling and noticing, and I respond with care. I care about what's happening with me. And again, very basic, but I think it's one of those great foundational kind of building blocks. And again, we can put this anywhere. This can be kind of fit in within, you'll hear this or see this being fit in within a variety of exercises we're going to break down over the next few minutes. So let's think through some of these in terms of kind of small pieces, small practices that we can be doing and bringing in. So we're going to go over about 10 or so of these small practices. And again, talk about purpose. You're going to see it at the beginning of each of these. I think as you hear these, a couple of thoughts I would give you just in terms of how to think about this information or how to use it. I'm going to, like I said, go through about 10 of these short ones. Then we're going to go through maybe 3 to 6 of the daily practices. With all of these things, it can be a little bit overwhelming to hear all these different options, right? So as you're hearing these things, don't feel that pressure that you've got to take on all of these or do all of these at the same time or got to do all of these in a given day. Notice what sticks out to you. Notice what purpose part you relate to. Where do you notice something that might be beneficial? And then identifying a few of these that we want to try to bring in or start practicing with. So let's go through these. So micro grounding, this idea with this is we're just kind of taking in the space. This is something very short. It's going to be reorienting that nervous system, the nervous system to the present instead of the past. So we're wanting to come back to the moment, being in the here and now. So we're looking around at our space. We're looking, seeing, maybe identifying 3, 4, 5 things that we can identify that feel neutral and pleasant to look at. We're feeling our feet on the ground, right? We're feeling our bodies settled into our seat or our chair. We might be doing this in our car. We might be doing this in our office. So being able to know, I'm here and I'm safe right now. My only goal in this exercise is just orienting to present. All right. Let's look at the breathing exercise. So this idea of exhale weighted breathing, all that means is we're putting more emphasis on the exhale. Part of what we're doing when we find ourselves in those trauma responses, our body is often getting tight, tense, locked up. And so our breathing tends to get really shallow, right? You'll hear a lot of these practices go back to deep breath, emphasis on exhale, like Eric was mentioning earlier as well. So part of this, we're trying to lengthen that exhale to activate that parasympathetic response. So we're doing that inhale for a count of 4, and then trying to shoot for like a 6 to 8 count on the exhale. So we're making sure we're really emptying those lungs out. And again, often we're keeping that breathing up here and shallow up in the chest. We want to get deeper down in that diaphragm, really get connected to the body. On that exhale, trying to imagine sort of tension releasing out of us, going through our feet and into the ground. Having that visual can kind of amplify that impact. Doing something like a containment gesture. So some of these practices you may notice, some of these practices, again, you might be familiar with, or you may have actually tried or kind of have cultivated over time. You also might notice that you do some of these things in more of an instinctual way. You didn't necessarily call it a containment gesture, but you might find, yeah, when I get really nervous or jittery, I kind of wrap my arms around myself, or I kind of hold myself tight. And again, I may not have understood what all that was kind of connecting to in my brain and how that was tied into trauma or other stressors I'm dealing with. But we just may sometimes have that instinctual desire to hold ourselves or to feel that positive pressure. So when you're doing something like this, it's just really crossing your arms kind of loosely, having your hands on your shoulders or maybe on your upper arms, and then just kind of a gentle pressure, something that feels comforting, something that feels secure, taking a couple of good breaths through that process. And again, thinking of a mantra, something really simple, like I can hold myself through this. When I'm holding myself, I'm okay. Something like that keeps us again grounded in that moment. That purpose is remembering that we want to come back to the body when that big world is feeling a little more overwhelming. we might do something like mindful walks, right? And so these may be within our buildings, especially if we're doing these during the workday, we might be going through big hallways or areas inside. We might be able to have some time where we get out on campus. And we're going to talk about these bigger practices in a few minutes, how we sort of combine some parts of this. But regardless of where we choose to do the walk or what opportunity we have, the purpose of that micro walk is kind of engaging with that integration, right? We're wanting to bring body and mind back together with environment. We're releasing, one of the phrases we use in here is this activation. We're releasing activation. That just means energy, right? This energy is kind of built up maybe throughout our day or when something bigger is kind of on the horizon. And so we've got that buildup of energy. We're trying to release some of that. And then we're also bringing in that sensory focus, right? That helps us stay kind of anchored to the present. So we're, again, stepping outside or going out into the hallway, having a space to go to. I think if this is one that is appealing to you, having a few places in mind, that okay, if I'm wanting to do a 5-minute walk, this is kind of the area that gets me there. If I went a little bit longer, I like to go to this space. Being able to then kind of, again, being real present to that physical sensation. My feet are on the ground, maybe feeling my feet, as they're kind of hitting that ground and moving through that space. Again, letting that gaze take in what's going on. We may be naming some things, noticing colors or lights, textures that we're seeing. And then noticing, if our mind does drift away to a trigger or a worry that we've got, just trying to bring ourselves back to using some of those sensory details. What do I see? Just name the things that I see. And for 5 minutes, maybe that's the space that I want to be in. We would just want to pull ourselves back into the body and back into that rhythm of movement. All right. So this name and nurture idea, the idea or the purpose behind this one is naming that experience. We're activating that prefrontal cortex. We're wanting to have that executive function to come in, and we're doing that to soothe those emotions in the brain. So it's fostering self-compassion and that sense of internal safety. So anytime we're feeling triggered in some way or overwhelmed in some way, you might not call it triggered necessarily. It may feel just more like overwhelmed or kind of, can get lost in your head. Quietly name what's going on. Name what's happening in your body. My chest is feeling tight. I notice that I feel fearful. My hands are feeling numb. My head's feeling buzzy. Whatever's going on physically that's going on there. Grounding yourself with things like that hand over the heart, or even touching kind of where the sensation is. If you're noticing, I've got a lot of tension in my jaw, maybe I'm putting my hands on my face, right? I'm touching that part that I notice is experiencing discomfort. It's manifesting sort of the emotional things that I've got going on in my body. And then just bringing that come into our body, right? This is a body memory. I'm not in danger. I'm okay. I'm safe. This is just a memory, right? So grounding yourselves, having that hand on heart, touching the space on body, bringing ourselves back into that moment. It can also be really helpful to use things like anchoring objects or sensory cues. I'm a huge fan of worry stones, which is why you see that one there. I literally have like a little stack of them here. And if you're in a session with me, I'm often probably sitting here playing with one of those. Those are really good things to have these sort of physical representations, this sort of tangible, external place to put our focus. It helps us regulate that nervous system. It also creates that kind of bridge back to the present moment, right? So if I've used that worry stone, if I use my little favorite worry stone, and that's what I'm holding and kind of rubbing while I'm maybe practicing some of the deep breathing, while I'm trying to come back to this present moment, it becomes really tied to that object. And so it helps us when we're having a moment of struggle. We're going to talk about, again, putting some things together in a moment, but when we're in that moment of struggle, to be able to pick up that object, to be able to use that to come back to the present. So having something like a stone, it can be a piece of fabric. I really like things with a text, some sort of texture that feels interesting. That tactile piece can be really grounding for us. It can also be things like an essential oils, something like that we bring in as well. Something that taps into sensory experience. And then when we are feeling dysregulated or overwhelmed, again, however we kind of refer to it, holding that, smelling the smell, if it's something like an essential oil, bringing in some breathing with it, because we're wanting to partner those things, right? When I'm feeling these big feelings, this object helps me remember, ooh, I can come back down off that ledge, right? So focusing on that texture or temperature or scent that's going on until that body comes back off that ledge a little bit. Next one is this mindful check-in. And so I like this one in particular because it really focuses on doing something that is a little more kind of preventative, being on that front end of things. So it's building that body awareness. We talk about somatic practice. It's just body-based, kind of awareness or practice. It helps it anticipate when dysregulation might happen. So what does this mean? This means I've got a meeting that's stressing me out that I'm going into, and I need to take a few minutes before I head into it to get myself in order. right? I'm getting ready to hop on a Zoom that's going to be stressful, and I'm getting myself in order before that. So noticing again what's kind of going on before the stressor's coming and asking ourselves those questions. What's my body saying? What emotions going on here? Where am I feeling things in my body? What do I need right in this moment? And again, I think our answers to those questions don't have to be solving big, complex problems. Our answers are, I need to take a few breaths. I need to not rush into this meeting and kind of slow down and take a mindful walk across campus so that I'm ready and in the headspace I want to be in when I go into something that might typically be difficult. And then doing some of those kind of completions of movements. So this can be after we've been in hard things. Again, I think meetings and meetings, Zooms, emails, some of those are good, easy examples for this, where we felt a lot of activation that's maybe come up. And maybe we didn't get to kind of act it and go through that experience the way that we most naturally would have wanted to. I had to sit still and listen and be quiet in this meeting, but internally, boy, I was feeling all this different stuff kind of flaring up. So when I get done, maybe I need to move my body, right? I need to stretch or have some motions that feel right. If I'm feeling a lot of bigger, intense emotion, maybe again, I need to be more active. That might look like a walk or that might look like other types of movement, but where we get to release some of that activation. Because remember, activation is just all that energy that's kind of getting stuck in our body. I'll let Eric cover the next couple of these and then I'll be back on with you.
So, Soles of the Feet is an exercise that, for those who are familiar, is pulled from the Mindful Self-Compassion curriculum. The purpose is to ground yourself in the present moment and to stabilize your body and mind when you're experiencing difficult emotions. And it can be done sitting or standing up, although I do recommend, personally, I like to stand up, and I think it allows for maybe some different range of movement. The idea of standing up, you can do it in shoes or barefoot or in socks. There is some research about like it really being calming to our nervous system if we have the opportunity to be barefoot out in the grass. But again, even if you're in your office with your shoes on, this is still an effective strategy. The idea would be that you would stand up and you would just notice the different sensations of your feet, noticing the weight of your body. You could kind of shift in your feet a little bit, moving side to side, noticing those changing sensations. You might rock forward and back. You could rock side to side. You could even extend this into doing slow, deliberate walking where you're really paying attention to your feet coming in contact with the ground, your feet in the air. The idea here is that you are really bringing yourself into your body and you're grounding yourself with your feet. There is you can after you are doing this for a while, your mind will probably wander into thought, and that's okay if you know yourself thinking. I like the practice of just acknowledging to yourself thinking, and then let me just come back into my body, back into the feeling of movement, feeling of my feet in contact with the floor. You can then sit down and expand your awareness to other areas in your body. Again, kind of bringing yourself into the present moment. This has particularly been within that curriculum. It's really emphasized, well, if we feel a really strong wave of anger or hurt, it can be really helpful to ground ourselves in this way. Humming and singing and chanting and gargling, all of these activate our vagus nerve, which creates feelings of safety and calm in the body. And so you've probably, a lot of you, maybe most of you have noticed that when we're stressed out, we often will hum to ourselves or we will sing a song. And this is our intuitive wisdom that we need to activate the vagus nerve. And so it can be helpful to inhale deeply through your nose, then do a gentle exhale, sustaining that sound. As you can hum songs, you can focus on the vibrations in your chest and your throat and in your head. Um, you can do chants or mantras. I have provided a video example of how you can engage with humming to activate the vagus nerve, as well as some additional sounds. Okay, our next slide. The alternate nostril breathing. This helps calm the body and reduce stress and anxiety, and it can also improve focus. There's been clinical trials that have shown that this strategy is particularly helpful if you have migraine headaches. It can reduce the frequency and severity of those headaches. So you want to sit up tall. You want to use your right thumb to close your right nostril, and then you would take a deep breath in through your left nostril. And then you switch over. So you breathe in through your left nostril, and then you're going to breathe out your right nostril by closing your left nostril. And you're going to kind of just move back and forth where you breathe in one nostril, and then you close that nostril, and then breathe out the other nostril. You breathe in your left, and then you breathe out your right, and you breathe it in your right, and then you breathe out your left. I've attached here, although the formatting here is a little wonky, but there is a video to Yoga with Adrienne where she demonstrates this. Cold exposure is just simply throwing cold water on our face. It's something that I did about an hour ago. It's really effective for activating the vagus nerve. Also, if you ever had the experience of if you're feeling very angry or stressed or hurt or a lot of feelings of just overwhelming emotion, if you've ever had the experience of stepping outside, if it's a cool day or if it's a cold day, getting that hit with that fresh like cool or cold air can bring calm to our body. That's what's happening there. So it's just a brief exposure to cold water. Next slide. Again, I think probably most of us know that listening to relaxing music, there's a reason why if you've ever had a professional massage that they have really, minimalist music playing at slow tempos. We know that like calming music increases our capacity to hold pain, to reduce stress, to improve our mood, and even to improve our cognitive functioning. And so that kind of relaxation music, what I would call spa music or minimalist music, can be really effective. We also know that the song of birds and the sound of water are universally calming to human beings. A lot of my clients, and myself included, will often like to sleep with, either an app where you're listening to the sound of a thunderstorm outside. That sound of rain and water, it really creates a sense of safety and calm in the body. And then I've also included this is an additional practice from the mindful self-compassion curriculum, this guided meditation called mindfulness of emotion in the body. I've linked it here on this slide. This is a way to activate, we talked earlier about the medial frontal lobe, to help enhance our self-awareness and to enhance our emotional stability. Okay, back to you, Rhonda.
There we go. Thanks, Eric. So, what I've put together in this next little chunk, I'm going to go over a few different sort of combined practices and some ways that we can put these parts together. We covered about 14, 15 examples there of some different kind of micro activities we could use. Again, you could take those, you could use those in varieties of ways, and those could absolutely kind of fit the bill and be the combination you need. What I find sometimes is some of my clients that I'm working with individually sometimes struggle to know sort of how do I put this together or where do I use this in my day? So, because we wanted that framework of this program to be around how to, when this shows up at work, how do we kind of navigate this in the workday? So, the next chunk we're going to talk about, I'm breaking this up into sort of a practice example you can do before work. So, kind of on your way in as you're getting ready to start the workday. I've got one I'm going to cover that's going to be sort of a midday reset, and then one that's going to be that end of the day. How do we disengage from work, kind of shift back to home life? There's some more examples that are going to be in the next few slides. I'm going to only go over one of those from each of those areas, but each of those kind of chunks of time actually is going to have 3 examples that I'm going to have just so you've got at least some different ways you might try this out. So let's look first at that sort of morning arrival idea. So again, we think about this from that point of view of purpose. That's what I find just makes most sense is I sort of think about how to put these puzzle pieces together. So that idea and the purpose of this is how do we arrive kind of present in our body? We're present to what's going on. We're in this present moment. We're not sort of distracted or in our heads kind of in other places or in past events. And we want to be able to be present and grounded to ourselves before we're trying to meet other people's needs, right? Before other folks are coming and sort of asking me for things or I'm tuning into students or patients or whoever it is you might be working with. And so here's a few ways we can put, again, some of the overlapping practices we talked about into sort of a cohesive unit. So in this practice example, we can do that first starting through orienting through the senses. So again, we're going to be standing or setting. We're taking in that sensory experience, looking around us, letting our eyes fall on those, 3, 4, 5 things that feel either neutral or comforting, something that you're just acknowledging what it is. There's my orange mug, there's my blue hat. Letting those sensory experiences cue us into, I'm in the here and now, right? One thing I would say with these practices, these sort of longer, putting together 2 or 3 pieces into these longer practices, one thing that I would encourage you to keep in mind is that we are not like these are not tasks that we're trying to rush ourselves through, right? I got to go do these things really fast so I can get started and make my first phone calls or get started on my email or whatever the task of the day is. The idea with these is really just the opposite, right? We're trying to slow ourselves down, be present to what's going on, acknowledge what's happening. We're not just in that productive, go, 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 do the next thing. We're letting ourselves just be a little bit, right? And that's how we bring in regulation. So we're doing some steady breathing in there. We might be doing that weighted breath. So things like doing the count of 4 inhale, but we're having that longer exhale of a 6 or 8 count. Planting our feet really good and firm, feeling that, or feeling our body kind of resting into our seat, allowing that out breath to kind of carry away that tension. I really like with this one, this idea of that micro intention that we pull in. So maybe we're dealing with some real, chaotic stuff at work right now. So in the midst of that chaos, I'm going to choose to meet this with steadiness. Or today I might be choosing to meet uncertainty. If there's change going on, whether that's at work or in other parts of your life, I'm going to choose to meet that uncertainty with more steadiness. So just letting yourself kind of connect those dots. This is why I'm doing this. This is what matters. And again, our goal is to slow down, to be present with ourselves. Maybe having that transition cue. I'm up and I've got the hand on the heart. I'm ready. I'm enough. I'm ready to start the day. So this is one example of a morning practice. And you might be doing this before you leave your house. That might make more sense to you, depending on whether you've got privacy to do this. If you've got a private office or a space you can do it in, this may be what you do when you very first get to work. But in that morning window, this kind of practice can help us really be present to ourselves, be grounded. And again, here's one example. You'll notice the little blue bar at the top. So there's another example you can go through, and there's a third one. I'm going to move on now to the midday practice. So when we look at kind of a midday practice, often there we're looking to do kind of a reset, right? We may have had a lot of stress in the morning or stress in the day, other things are activating us, and we might need to release some of that tension, get some of that energy out, and get back to re-regulation. So again, we're often going to pull this in. We're going to do some grounding. Where's my body? Where are my feet on the ground? How am I feeling this? I might be taking 3 of those good big, heavily weighted breaths that are more kind of focused on the exhale. And maybe I'm doing some movement, right? So that might be where I bring one of those mindful walks in. And if it's lunch, maybe I can do longer. Maybe I can do 10 or 15 minutes, a little bit longer in this walk piece. Letting our arms swing, feeling that movement of the body, that bilateral movement is helping us process things. If something distressing has happened, visualizing that emotion going through me and I'm stomping it into the ground. Y'all, I've stomped many feelings around this campus at different times, right? So letting it come out the body, feeling it come out my arms when they're swinging. And then when we're trying to come back into kind of our work mode, if we're doing this as a midday reset, then coming back to stillness, right? We get back to our desk or we might sit on a bench outside for a little bit and we got the hand over the heart, right? We're giving ourselves a grounding point. What do I need in this moment? Do I need rest or kindness? Do I need this reset? Having that slow exhale. Okay, I can begin again. I can face that second half of my day. So again, this is more in that midday reset, needing to kind of get ourselves regrounded. Here's one example of that. Again, you'll see the yellow bars. You're going to see another example you can go through on your own, and then a third example. So you'll get these materials and you can go through those. This is one example of an end of the day one, and I'm going to wrap this one up so we've got some time for questions. So let me touch on a couple of things with this one. This definitely is being able to kind of take those days' experiences and put them into this idea of a container. All right. We make space for rest and renewal. We've done enough for the day. So being able, again, pausing and slowing down. These aren't tasks we're trying to run through. We're trying to slow down and be present with ourselves, having the time to take some of those breaths, noticing how our body's feeling, naming some of those things like we've been talking about. Visualizing a container, you will see my container is my caboodle from the 80s that is over in the corner. It carried my makeup of the 80s. I figure it can carry some emotions for me these days. And I picture my caboodle and I lock it up and I slide it under my desk. And that's it. I'm moving on from that day, right? I like these questions for some processing. So if you're wanting to think this through a little bit more and think through the day some, you might do a little journaling. Maybe you're thinking about these on your drive home or your walk at the end of the day. Maybe you're talking to your partner about some of these things if you'd like to get that out and that way you share that with somebody. And then again, that completion cue, right? I've done enough, hand on my heart, coming back to that moment. And again, closing things down, having some of those symbolic gestures. And the same thing with this one. Here, this was one example. I'm going to include a second one and a third one. So you've got some different ways you can close down that day. Sometimes things are feeling bigger, you all. Sometimes we're using some of these tools and it just feels like I either can't get my head around it or I'm really having more distress than what I can sort of handle just through some of these kind of practices. That might be a time to come talk to somebody like me or Eric. So I've got some information, again, some indicators there of some signs that it might be a little bigger. It might be time to talk with someone either like us or someone else out in the community. And then these are the four members of our team. I know many of you all are familiar names and faces, so you all may have been to other programming and know Kim and Ann as well, but these are our four full-time therapists. And then this is how you reach out to us. So all employees are eligible for 5 visits to our office. That renews every year. So you've always got those 5 visits available in that coming year. You can scan the QR code to be able to get to our main information about scheduling those appointments. We're located in Breckenridge, but we do a combination of in-person and telehealth work. And I think with that, I'm at questions. All right.